All right, welcome everybody. Let's do this. Where are the champs? The champs are here. AP Calc. Let's go to page 2 and let's look at the first question for today. So for this difficulty, the difficulty of this lesson, what are the levels? You got easy, medium, difficult, and you got ay Dios mío, Mr. Pero cookie. That's on that next level stuff. But for today, we're we're just on medium, right? So and my bad, my voice is really messed up, but the only way this lesson is going to be medium if you are patient. Okay, so I want you to just remember that while you're taking this lesson, all right? So what's going on here? We finished this lesson with something like this, right? We had some f inverse of f of x equals x, or f of f inverse of x equals x, okay? That's what we finished off with today. So let's build from this. Let's assume that g of x is equal to f inverse of x, okay? So now let's have some, so you see how if g of x is equal to f inverse x, right? I could substitute this f inverse x that is here for g. So notice that I had this originally, and now I could just say this is f of g of x, okay? That's just the first part. Now let's look at the next part. And by the way, please write all of this down, right? Now let's look at the next part. If you know, remember, I'll just write it again. You know that, actually, let me zoom in the camera and the lights. Okay, this is pretty cool. Let's see. So we know that g of x is equal to f inverse x, right? So if I have f of f inverse of x equals x, I could substitute this f inverse x for g of x, so I could say f of g of x equals x. So this whole day, we haven't done any calculus. So now, let's use some calculus, right? So let's use some calculus. And what are we going to do? What we're going to do is we're going to take the derivative d dx on both sides. Okay, so d dx. So we're going to take the derivative of both sides. Now this should look familiar because you hear, what is the derivative of x? This is just 1, okay? So that's not that. But then what's the derivative of f of g of x? So what I want you to do is be patient, try and think, what would you have to do to actually solve the derivative of this, right? And let's say you're coming back here, you have to use the chain rule. You have to think that, where is my red and blue? Do I have red and blue? Hold on. Let's see. Okay, this will work. So this is my red. F, oh god, that's a pink, my bad. So this is the outside, and this is the inside, right? Okay, so now what do you have to do? You have to take the derivative of the outside, so f prime of g of x, and this stays the same, times the derivative of the inside of g prime of x, this equals 1. Okay, and then what else can you get from here? You can divide, from this point, you could divide both sides by f prime of g of x on both sides, so this cancels. So now this is over here, f prime of g of x. So then you have this little equation, that g prime of x is equal to 1 over f prime of g of x. But also, you know that g of x is also the inverse of f of x. Okay, so we'll come back to that. So this is really important. So now let's go to this page over here. And what I want you to do is I want you to have this with you. Okay? This will kind of be like our little tool we're going to use. So let's take a look at this question. Here, and we're going to go everything step by step, right? So here, let's read it together. It's saying, let me get this straight, okie dokie. It's saying the function f is defined by f of x equals negative x cubed minus 4x plus 1. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to write f of x is equal to negative x cubed minus 4x plus 1. Okay? Next thing, and you know the point 0, 1 is on the graph of f. So notice that because you have this point, this is true. For sure this is true, that if I plug in 0 into f, what will we get? We're going to get 1. Okay, so that's true. So we did the first part. The function is defined by f of x. The point 0, 1 is on the graph of f, so this has to be true. And we know that g of x is equal to f inverse of x. Okay? Now what's the question asking? It's saying what's g prime of 1? Okay, so how do we even begin? The idea is, you know this little trick that this is true with functions. You know f of f inverse of x is equal to x. This is just a fact. Okay, so let's use that. So we know that this is true no matter what. F of f inverse of x is equal to x. So that's true. But then, what do you know about f inverse of x? It's equal to g of x. So then now you could say f of g of x equals x. And then how can we continue here? We're going to do the same exact thing we did back over here. What we're going to do is, let's take the derivative of both sides. So if I take the derivative of this, d dx, and take the derivative of this side, d dx, right? And just like we did before, that what will this become? We have to use the chain rule. So this is f prime of g of x times g prime of x equals 1. And now we have g prime of x is equal to 1 over f prime of g of x. Okay? So far, yeah, so we have this. But then how does having this help us get that? So let's see, what does the question say? It says we want g prime of 1. So if I do g prime of 1, anywhere I see x, I'm going to put a 1. So this becomes 1 over f prime of g of 1. Okay? Now your question, once we get to this point, is what is g of 1? What does g of 1 equal? Oh man, what does g of 1 equal? How do we figure out what g of 1 is? Well, you know what? You know that g of x is equal to f prime of x. Okay? So you know that g of 1 has to equal, right? Let's focus here. G of 1 has to equal f inverse of 1. Okay? So what is f inverse of 1? Do we know what this is? Question mark. It comes back to using this guy over here. If you know f of 0 is 1, based on what we did in class, if f of 0 is 1, what has to be true? You know that f inverse of 1 is 0. And if you know that f inverse of, okay, so this is from what we did today, right? And if you know if f inverse of 1 is 0, remember f inverse and g are the same. So you know that g of 1 has to be 0. Okay? So now we know that g of 1 is 0, so we could plug that in over here. So we know that g prime of 1 is equal to 1 over f prime of 0. Okay? Now, what happens here? This is f prime of 0. Do we know what f prime is, right? We don't know what the g function is. We just know it's the inverse of this. What the inverse of this is, we don't know. But do we know f prime of 0? What's the derivative of f? This is easy money. What's the derivative of f? Negative 3x squared minus 4. Right? So we know the derivative of f. So then what is f of 0? You're just plugging in 0 into here. So it's negative 3 times 0, which is 0 minus 4. So g prime of 1 is equal to 1 over negative 4. And that's it. And we solved it because that's what the question is saying. What is g prime of 1? So this, like I said, difficulty is a medium. You have to be patient. All right? I want you to really take your time, and this pattern will make more sense the more you do it. What I want you to do is, seeing this pattern that we've done before, what I want you to do is try and do the next question by yourself. The setup is, Very similar, okay? So let's take a look. Let's say you pause the video and you're trying to do this by yourself. What I'm gonna do is I'll show you, you see like how when you rewind the video, you see how what I do is I kind of go from like here to here, right? I want you to kind of have that same idea going with it. So let's look at this question here. What is the first move? It says the function f is defined by x cubed plus 5x minus 1. Okay, so you know that f of x is equal to x cubed plus 5x minus 1. You know that f of 1 is 5. So why don't you do a little hint? What is f inverse of 5? What does this have to be? That has to be 1. So note, you're gonna maybe have to use this in the future. Now you know, what's the next thing saying? It's saying if g is the inverse of f. So then how do you translate this sentence into algebraic notation? All you're saying is g of x is equal to f inverse of x. Okay, that's how you translate this English statement into algebraic notation. It says, what is the value of g prime of 5? Okay, so let's see. Use what you know. You know what's true. You know f inverse of x is equal to x. You know this is true. This is true, no matter what. So, but you know what f inverse of x is? It's g of x. So you know f of g of x equals x. Then what do? Take the derivative of both sides. So let's take d dx on both sides, right? And it's the same thing we've done before, right? So you say f prime of g of x times g prime of x equals 1. So you know g prime of x is equal to 1 over f prime of g of x. And don't skip this step, because there's a difference between understanding and memorizing. Like, when you do this, you don't have to memorize this as much. Because if you know how to derive this yourself, you'll never have to try and remember this. You just have to take the derivative and use the chain rule. So here, going back to the question, what's the question saying? It's saying, what's g prime of 5? Well, g prime of 5, I'm just going to plug into this function. So anywhere I see x, I put in 5. So this is 1 over f prime of g of 5. Okay? So now, how do we continue? What is g of 5? I don't know what g of 5 is, but I know what's the correlate, what's information we have. We know g of 5 has to be the same as f inverse of 5. And notice, hint, hint, wink, wink, we already did it, right? We kind of like looked into the future. We know f of 1 is 5, so f inverse of 5 is also 1. But you know that f inverse and g are the same function. So if this is true, then you know g of 5 also has to be 1. And then once you get to this point, now you know g prime of 5 is equal to 1 over f prime of 1. Now, do we have f prime? Do we know what f prime is? I mean, it's easy to figure out. Like, what is, I'll write it over here, what is f prime of x, right? It's 3x squared plus 5. So what is f prime of 1? You're just plugging 1 into this, so it's 3 times 1 squared plus 5, which is 3 times 1 plus 5, which is 3 plus 5, which is 8. Okay? So you know g prime of 5 is equal to 1 over 8. And done. Okay. That was just part 1. I'm sorry, this was just part 2. For the next part, what I'll do is, let's see, do I have time? I'll try and have time. Do I have time? Okay, I'm gonna do one more. I'll try and do this for tonight, okay? But as long as you felt like you understood this, what I'll do is I'll give a delta math, but the problem is delta math gives a combination of this one, this one, and this one. And to do these, you know what, try and do the delta math. And if you can't do it, don't worry about it. Like, I'll show you how to do these tomorrow. But try and be clever. Knowing what we did here, try and figure out how to do these. Okay? I'll see you in class tomorrow.